Welcome to the space between. This is where honest conversations live. Be prepared to explore the gap between what we say we do and what really drives growth, creativity, and change. Brought to you by MSQ. Visit msqindex.com to learn more. Join us now as we enter the space between.
Hi, and welcome to the Space Between, brought to you by MSQ, where our mission is to help agencies be brilliant at delivering strategy to their clients. I'm Seth Hawthorne, and I'm joined by my co-host, Deb Richardson, the founder of MSQ. Hi, Deb.
Hi, Seth.
And also virtually and metaphorically, occupying the space between us is our guest, Aaron Hutchinson, the founder of the Hutchinson consultancy. So hello, Aaron.
Nice to see you.
Great to have you here. This is the podcast where we talk about the gaps that matter, the ones between agencies and their clients, between strategy and execution, between where you are and where you're trying to get to, because we believe this is the most important thing. Most businesses don't struggle because they lack ideas or talent. They struggle because of what happens in those spaces. It's the misalignments, the assumptions that never get questioned, the conversations that don't happen. So on each episode of the Space Between, we sit down with the experts who've learned to navigate these gaps, agency and business leaders, strategists, founders, and specialists like Aaron, all experts at figuring out how to turn ambiguity into opportunity. So whether you're an agency trying to prove your value or a brand trying to get more from your partners, from your agency partners, this, we hope, is the podcast for you. And if there is anyone more super qualified to talk about the conversations that don't happen between an agency and its client, it's Aaron. So a very warm welcome again. And we're excited to be speaking to you today. And so to kick us off, do you want to tell us a bit more about your own pathway to being here and what led you to set up the Hutch consultancy?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Seth. And nice to see you too, Debbie. Let me just start with, I guess, what I do now, and then I can just tell you a little bit about my story.
Absolutely.
So I work with creative companies to solve problems around positioning, pitching, and pricing. And essentially my thing is really helping those businesses to show up as the expert to win more business at a higher price. Like you said, I run my own business, the Hutch Consultancy, and I'm also the EMEA training director for Win Without Pitching, which was founded by Blair Enns. So that's what I do now. In terms of how I got here, I've been working in the creative industry since about the year 2000. I started off in the world of TV, finding contestants for game shows and quiz shows.
Wow.
over a few years, then that moved into more kind of niche, specialized web video, sort of before YouTube was really a thing. So I was working on beauty tips channels and gardening tips channels, all on sort of online for brands, but wasn't really being seen by anybody, but was obviously a good experience. And then that eventually I ended up in agency land. And so I spent many years, about 12 years, at a business called Across the Pond. When I joined Across the Pond, we were an in-house video production company for Google. So we were based inside Google in London. So I had all of the experience of working inside Google for a few years, even though I wasn't a Googler. And then, over time, we sort of we grew outside of Google and tried to build a business outside of Google. And I guess that's where a lot of these learnings came from that I now talk about. Over time, I then became the managing director of Across the Pond. We were a global business. By the time that I left, we had offices in San Francisco, London, and Singapore. And we'd really kind of niched down into the area of cutting edge tech. So we were working with tech firms, big tech firms like Google, Amazon, Meta, Expedia, and other tech businesses too. But really at that sort of like cutting edge of AI, quantum computing, that became our specialism. And then about 2 years ago, I left Across the Pond. I had started coaching for a bit. Actually, maybe I should just rewind a tiny bit. We probably in about 2016, 2017, when we were trying to grow the business outside of Google, we were coming across some problems, and it wasn't quite so easy to grow the business. And I then, alongside the founder Julie, we saw Blair Enns speak at an IPA event in London, and he was talking about kind of the folly of agencies pitching and giving away all of their value for free. He was talking about value pricing, and all of these things just really sort of, I don't know, just all these like
Resonated with
alarm
you.
bells. Yeah, just all these alarm bells started going off my head. And it's like, this sounds so interesting. We went down that rabbit hole and started employing a lot of the win without pitching techniques in the business. Blair Enns actually came into the business to do some training with us, and it had a massive, massive impact. In 1 year, we were able to calculate that we made $1 million of extra revenue just through doing things like offering pricing options and thinking more about value and just doing the sales process differently. So then to jump forward, about 3-4 years ago, I became a freelance coach for Win Without Pitching, having successfully applied those techniques. And then 2 years ago, made the leap to leave the world of agency and to set up my own thing and to work more closely with Win Without Pitching.
Wow.
Hopefully that does the story.
That's great.
Well, that's a really great story, Aaron. And I mean, and to make that leap from sort of TV into agency and then make it out into consultancy, and sort of now be, paddling very much your own canoe is I guess, incredibly exciting for you. But going back to the sort of the relationship with Win Without Pitching, Blair Enns, I mean, it worked for across the pond, but do you think it works for any type of agency? Do you feel that it does? You have to be a certain type of agency, or is it applicable to all?
I think when I really think about what Win Without Pitching has this name, and everybody thinks it's just about not pitching. That's obviously the name for the business came from the original book, the Win Without Pitching Manifesto. When I think about Win Without Pitching now, I think it's about how do you, as the expert business, actually show up as the expert. And I think there's a big gap there. I think so much of in agency world, and probably any business, quite frankly, there's a lot of us in those businesses that have never been taught how to sell. We learn bad habits from those above us who also never learned how to sell. So there's this sort of like vicious circle of everybody just sort of learning from each other and winging it slightly, relying on their creativity, relying on their personality, but with very often without much process in place. And I think that's what Win Without Pitching is amazing for, is sort of giving agencies and creative businesses and any other business quite simple frameworks, quite frankly, but frameworks that are currently missing in businesses to enable them to lead in the sale, and to lead their clients on the journey, or their potential clients on the journey to solutions that are going to help them grow their business.
Can I ask a question?
Sorry, Deb, you jump in.
Sorry, I was just going to ask a question there in terms of how do agencies feel about the sell or sales word? Because I know it's not. I've done quite a lot of work in professional services. I know it's just a word that people get the heebie-jeebies from.
I think that's right. I think unless you're officially got sales in your title, then you're totally happy with the word sales. But for most people, whether you might be, I don't know, producers, designers, account managers, account directors, head of client services, often the word sales feels a bit dirty. People don't like it. They're a bit scared of the word. But I think that probably just comes from perhaps a lack of confidence in knowing how to sell.
Yeah.
And then it feels like this like bad thing over here. But I think once people become more confident with it,
they don't feel like they're selling.
They can embrace the phrase, and there's nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with selling. That's what we're in business for, is to sell our solutions. And I think most of those people who may even not like the word selling do appreciate that they have a role in growing the business, in growing new business, and that they do have a role in selling. They just don't necessarily like the official nature of the title, I guess.
Yeah. Well, agencies avoid having that as a title in their businesses. I mean, there's nobody is called head of sales or
very rarely,
in the agencies I know. So your business development or new business. I completely hear you. And also I hear you when you talk about, we're taught to sell badly. I come also from a sales background, and that was very much my experience also. And for me, when I sort of picked up Blair's book, it was very much focused about having a conversation, having
Mhm.
a really good conversation.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, when you're selling, you're not listening. So that seemed
Mhm.
to be like a big message with with Blair in terms of what he's saying to agencies. Is that the case?
I think so. I think it's funny because I was never taught how to sell. All through all the different jobs that I did, but eventually selling was a part of what I did. And I worked a lot in video and film. So my title when I was doing the job was a producer, and part of my job as a producer was to make the films, but the other part of my job was to be the account manager and to help to grow the business. But I do look back now, and I just, before I knew how to do it, I just, not that I cringe, but I go, oh God, I sort of
I
do
think we
cringe a
do
little.
cringe.
I do cringe a little bit because I was just showing up to new business meetings and just relying on my instincts rather than knowing what to do. And as soon as I knew what to do and I was shown the way, I was still able to use all of those good instincts and hopefully my good humor and my personality to help to win the client over as well. But I all of a sudden I now had basically a map to follow, and I think that's when that gives you confidence, and all of a sudden you just get much better at it.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and is that really what is missing from agencies is that they don't have a process, they don't have a roadmap, they don't have a structure. That they're good at what they do, creativity, digital, or whatever their specialism is, but they're very bad at sort of articulating the process or the capabilities
Mhm.
to their client.
That's a big question. I guess that you can start at the beginning. This isn't the case for all creative companies, whether agencies or web design, but I think, often these agencies are set up by often a group of friends, and they just, when they're a bit younger, and they go, wouldn't it be great to set up some kind of, agency, and that feels like a great thing to do. And often they're really, really successful to start with. But I think when I see a lot of those businesses, they're not necessarily set up with a specialism or an expertise in mind. It's just like, it's more focused on their skill. Let's do branding or web building or advertising or marketing, whatever it would be. And
Oh,
then
they're
they
good at.
obviously, and then naturally they have to try and win every piece of business that they can. They have to say yes to everything. So it would take quite a confident business to go, we're just going to set up to to set up to serve this particular niche from day one. I think you need to get to that place. But so I think you end up with lots and lots of these businesses who they're very, very, very good at what they do, but they've just sort of ended up being sort of stuck in this sort of like generic pond where it's just like everybody's saying the same thing. I think when everybody's saying the same thing and you can't truly articulate what you do, it all starts getting a little messy,
So
and you start lacking confidence in the way that you talk about yourself. You don't have much of a process. You don't really know how to do your case. Everything just sort of just ends up in this sort of a bit of generic mush, and it doesn't scream expert or confidence.
yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
how does an agency escape that? I mean, does that happen before? Does that need to happen before they have an engagement with the client? I mean, is there a conversation that they need to have internally within the business before they even go and speak to a client?
So I guess, I mean, that's, maybe you've teed that up quite well. The way that we talk about new business now at Win Without Pitching is it's called the 4 conversations model. And essentially what that
Right.
does, it breaks the sales process down into 4 distinct conversations. Now, the reality is in real life, sometimes selling is a little messier, and it may not be 4 conversations, but for the purposes of learning how to do it, we think about the sale as 4 different conversations. And at any point in time through that sales process, you should be able to, as the salesperson, be able to identify exactly where you are in the sales process. You should know what conversation am I in, what are my objectives, and what frameworks am I using for this conversation. So each conversation sort of has a set of rules. But to go back to your question, that first conversation is called the probative conversation. And really, it's the conversation that your business is having with the world whilst you're not present. So that is essentially, it's your positioning, it's your thought leadership, it's your marketing, but it's everything it's the conversation that your business is having with your potential clients, hopefully demonstrating your expertise and moving those potential clients from seeing you as a potential vendor to being seen as an expert.
That's obviously critical.
Yeah.
So I mean, so is that you say that the conversations all the conversations don't need to happen, and you may miss out a conversation, but is the probative conversation the most important conversation?
They all need to all the 4 conversations do need to happen.
They do need to
They
happen.
do need to happen. It may be just the case that conversations 2 and 3, they're called the qualifying conversation and the value conversation, they may end up happening together, right?
Right.
So it just, the nature of the sale might be that you can just have those 2 same conversations at the same time, but you should still be, as that salesperson, go, oh, in my head, right, I'm now in the value conversation, even if it's moved in from the previous conversation, if that kind of makes sense. But is the probative conversation the most important conversation? I sit on the fence. They're all important conversations, but I think if that probative conversation, essentially what we're saying here is, if your positioning isn't right, if the way that your business is talking to the world is generic and non-expert, that is going to be a big problem. And that is going to affect your ability to lead in the sale. It's going to affect your ability to derail pitches. It's going to affect your ability to win business at a higher price, because you're not going to be seen as the expert. You'll just be seen as the vendor, as any other service provider. And that definitely causes a problem.
Yeah. And you talked then about a winning business at a higher price, and that is obviously a perennial issue for agencies. And obviously, lots. If it moves, an agency pitches for it. So what is your advice around pricing? I mean, how should you approach it as an agency? I mean, what is the conversation that you need to have with a client to put you in the best position to get the best price or the best value?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's probably lots of things that I could say to that. One of the things that I learned, and obviously that I teach now, is what we call the 3-year question. And the 3-year question is a question that you would ask from your very first in-person conversation with the client. So that's the qualifying conversation, the second conversation. And this question is the thread through the whole sales process. And I really believe that it's the question that opens up opportunity and the ability to win business at a higher price. And so the question is this, or a version of this, but as close to this as possible. So imagine, as Seth or Debbie, we're in this qualifying conversation, and I'm trying to. You're the client, and I'm the agency, and I would say to you something along the lines of, "I have this really big question for you. The question is this: it's 3 years from now. We're having coffee. What's happened in that time to make you happy?" And then I shut up. But it's a it's a super. I would love to know your answer to that question. But
I love that question. I love it because you can't help but, I mean, obviously you're it doesn't cost anything to dream, does it?
And you're out of the now and into the future. Which
I mean, it's a brilliant question to ask, and it's obviously you want a positive outcome in 3 years' time.
Right.
And it's often easier, I guess, to kind of like say, okay, well, if I got to this point, how did I get to this point, and what are the steps that I need to take to get there?
Yeah, I think that's all right, and I think so. Actually, the question is, the question comes from a guy called Dan Sullivan. He wrote a short book called The 3-Year Question. So that's worth checking out.
Right. Yeah.
But And that essentially was the question. But yeah, something magical I think happens when you ask that question, because typically a client will come to the agency with a need, and that need is often quite tactical. So it'll be things like, I need an explainer film, I need an influencer campaign, I need a
Yeah.
website, I need a presentation. So that they're very in the moment. They need to solve an immediate problem, and they really may need to solve that problem. But if you take the time to ask that question at the beginning of the conversation, it just takes them out of their immediate stress, their immediate need for that thing, and it just opens up opportunity. And so if you ask that question well, and you spend some time digging into their response, so it's not just ask the question, move on. They give you an answer, and then you go, oh great, I've asked the question, and you just move on. You might spend 5-10 minutes on that question. You learn a lot about the business, and you learn
Yeah.
all sorts of different things, and all the different ways that you may or may not be able to help them.
Yeah.
And what the question isn't, is because it's quite an open-ended question. It's just like, we're having coffee 3 years from now, what's happened to make you happy? They might go into, they might talk about their career and how they want to be made the CMO, or they may talk about the actual business. You don't know where they're going to take you in that question. So the question is not, it's 3 years time, we're having coffee and the work that we've done together has been successful. That's not the question. The question is
No.
bigger than that. The question is just, what's happened to make you happy? And we just let the client open up. What happens then is, all of a sudden we have, at the low end, their tactical need, let's just call it a website. But when we get further down the sales process, we now have this big 3-year ambition, and we can start thinking about all the different ways that we can help to bring that dream,
Yeah.
make that dream true. Now, we may or may not be able to do all of it, but we can start realizing what parts of that story can we make happen for the client, and we can start offering that to the client.
And I think that also immediately, your preamble was, you coming in as a supplier, and they're looking at you and they're going, oh, they're going to build us a website, they're going to do X, they're going to do Y, whatever they're going to do. Then what happens when you ask that question? They're not looking at you through the same lens. They're not going, oh, this guy or this gal is not help this agency.
Yeah.
And not actually coming to build X. And it's sort of, and I'm going to ask you a process-based question shortly, but I think it's sort of, I've noticed when we engage and we start asking questions about the business, in a different way. You ask the 3-year question, we start asking questions about the business, and they sort of think, oh, this is not a marketing topic, or this is not a growth topic, this is a business topic. It's like, no, it's a business topic. So immediately you ask that question about 3 years, I stop looking at you as the website agency, but as somebody that's going to help me get to that 3 years. So it's an awesome question.
And I think that it's a great question, but it's also a question that when you start telling people or teaching people how to start using it, that a lot of people find it really awkward to start with, because there's a slight fear of just like, well, they've just come to me for this small thing, and suddenly I'm asking them this big 3-year question. And so you just have to find different ways of, sometimes it can feel quite disconnected for the person when they first start asking that question, and it can feel awkward and cringy. And it's just like trying to get over that and just explaining to the client, look, we always ask this question to potential new clients. It's our intention to want to work with you in the longer term, not just in the short term. So we ask this big question. Loads of different ways to tee up the question, but it really does. It's great stuff happens. And then you can then, further down the path, you can then start going, well, if I could make that happen, how much would you pay me for that?
Yeah.
And then that becomes
have you ever been in a situation where the client has been unable to articulate where they want to be in 3 years' time, and how do you help them overcome that?
I think 2 things. Sometimes people worry that, what happens if the client tells me that they have no intent, they don't want to answer the question? Yeah, so there's a bit of a fear around what's the client's response going to be. Honestly, that's never happened to me, first of all.
Right.
So if you set it up well, nearly everybody's quite happy to talk about their dreams and ambitions. Yeah.
Totally.
Do some people are some people not able to answer the question? Yes. And I think what's telling about that is that it probably means that we're not speaking to the right person. They don't
Interesting.
necessarily have the full picture, right? So if I was speaking to the founder of a business or somebody in the senior leadership team, I would really expect them to be able to answer that question, because they should be really aligned with where the business is going and what the business's goals and ambitions are. But perhaps if I was speaking to, I don't know, some more sort of junior product marketing manager or something like that, I don't know what the title might be, they may not be quite so aligned. And that would just signal to me that we're probably more in vendor mode here, or we need to somehow get access to the more senior stakeholders.
Yeah.
And if that is the situation, I mean, that trying to get further up the sort of food chain, as it were, how should an agency approach that?
It's just ask.
Yeah.
I think I don't. It's every business is every big organization is different, and there's all sorts of politics going on. But I think at the most basic level, if you want access to more senior stakeholders, you need to just ask and go, would it be possible to bring in person X into this conversation? We think it would be really helpful for these reasons. Or if we're talking about something bigger, just ask. And it may work, it may not work, but don't ask, don't get.
Yeah. And in your experience, what is the question that agencies are most fearful of asking of a client? Where is the territory they kind of really don't want to go?
I don't know that there's I don't know that it's a case of agencies being fearful or not wanting to go to places. I think what happens a lot is the client comes to you with a need, and we just go into waiter mode. Is the best way maybe to describe it, where the client says they need X and we go, sure, no problem. And we very quickly go into solutions mode. We really quickly try and work out, and because we're creative people, we're very quickly solving the problem, in the conversation. And then we start thinking about, well, that's going to cost you X, Y, or Z. And we're just essentially giving them what they've asked for. Especially when there's things like pitches and RFPs and,
just feeding into their brief, aren't you, rather than challenging it?
And you're not. Yeah, and so that's what I think was happening. You're just taking the order. And the analogy we use a lot is the doctor's surgery analogy. And I think I've told you this one before, but the doctor's surgery analogy is, imagine that you're the doctor. And there's basically two scenarios here. Scenario A is the patient comes into you and they say, doctor, I've got some chest pains. I've been Googling over the weekend. I've worked out that this is what my problem is and this is what I need. Can I get a prescription for X, or can I get surgery? I need some kind of heart surgery. A bit of a silly example, but imagine then the doctors to go, sure, yeah, no problem. I'll get that sorted for you. Or there's the other option doorway B, which is the patient comes in and goes, doctor, I've got some chest pains. And I've been doing some Googling and I think this might be what the problem is. And the doctor essentially just says, stop. Get on the bed, whatever we need to do. We're going to really work out what the problem is here. Then we're going to work out what the treatment is. That's the role that agencies need to be playing. Is we need to see ourselves as equivalent to doctors in our own businesses. And okay, we don't have DR in front of our name and we don't necessarily have all the letters after our names, but we should still be operating in that same way. We should still be having that same professional integrity as a doctor does, and not just taking what the client says to us is the problem.
So
Yeah.
I've got a question here, and we had Mark Holland on a couple of weeks ago. He's an experienced CMO currently working at Sharp Ninja, and he was like, he said, I'm gasping for that. I'm gasping for agencies to come in. He said sometimes our briefs are a little bit shonky, and they need more meat on the bones. And we're waiting for them to do that. What do you think's stopping them, Aaron? What do you think why do you think they're not doing it? Because the clients give, I put posts up about, challenge the client brief. So they're giving permission, and the
Mhm.
agencies are not taking it. What do you think's stopping them?
Well, I think obviously, as Seth mentioned, uh, the kind of fear a minute or two ago, and you were talking about what's the where are agencies fearful of going, and what conversations are they fearful of having. Maybe maybe they are operating out of fear of rocking the boat, fear of if we start causing trouble, they're just going to speak to an agency who's just they would rather go with an agency who's just going to just not ruffle any feathers. So perhaps there's just that everybody wants to win the business so much, especially in this current climate
They
where,
sit on the fence.
yeah, it's the most important thing for them is to win the business and just like not ruffle any feathers and basically follow the instructions. It's maybe I mean, it's probably much more complicated than that, but perhaps that's one of the reasons where you just want to get it done. You just want to win the piece of work, and you're just going to just give them what they ask for. Sometimes it just feels easier, but I don't think that that's necessarily the right thing to do.
Yeah, but then you're starting the whole relationship on the foot that you don't want to
Mhm.
be on.
Well, yeah, I think clients love to pigeonhole us. They want to say, "Oh, you're the strategic agency, or you're the video case study agency, or you're the web building agency." So, excuse me, when we're trying to get in there with the client, we need to be put in the right pigeonhole to start with.
Yeah, I also think as well, and I'm coming from my CMO hat, I was always looking for a reason not to pick them as well.
Mm.
So it's like it's not who actually stood out, but it's a really, I think I'm a nice person. It was really hard saying to agencies it's not you, but I was looking more for reasons not to pick them and go, I'm not picking you because of blah. And
Mm.
I think that's, if you're not stepping up, stepping forward, doing something different, I wouldn't want my agency to have, oh, well, you didn't come with anything different and
Yeah,
you're a bit bland. I'd rather have that. I'd rather not get the job for being a bit too outspoken than
right.
not get the job for being a bit boring.
There's also something interesting that it's kind of related, but you were saying you were looking for all the reasons not to pick an agency. I
Oh,
actually think I think agencies should be much more honest with themselves, and they should actually go through an exercise themselves, going, "What are all the reasons why we're not going to win this piece of work?" And actually write that, and think of what are all the reasons the client is not going to pick us. And actually, you have this like amazingly powerful list then that you can then start addressing some of those issues proactively with the client. It might be all sorts of things like around they're not going to pick us because we might be too expensive or in the wrong location, or all sorts of hosts of reasons why or we don't have that specific expertise. But at least you can be much more proactive then in addressing some of those issues that you might see coming down the line. So yeah, for agencies just to think about what are all the objections the client might have, because I think we always go into these engagements, which is this feeling of like, yeah, we're going to win it.
So
And you think of all the reasons you're going to win it, but you don't think of all the reasons you're going to lose it. And I think that's a much more honest, more interesting list.
they do, when agencies have not won, do they do a wash up? Do they go and ask the client for feedback? Do they listen, or they just go, "Oh, that client was rubbish," and just grumble off into the next pitch?
I think, I think, it sounds obvious, doesn't it? But just asking for feedback is so crucial. And I remember actually, this is back in my across the pond days, we were pitching for, I can't remember the exact name of it. It's the Harry Potter experience up in Watford, the big Warner Brothers studio thing. And so we were pitching for, this was in our early days of trying to win business outside of Google. And I don't know how we ended up in this position, but anyway, we ended up pitching for some kind of campaign to promote promote the Harry Potter thing. And we didn't, we put in so much work into this pitch, and we got the email back, the typical email that said, you haven't won, not been successful. And we asked for feedback, and it was so telling. They said, we picked you as an agency because we saw you as YouTube experts, and you didn't give us one YouTube idea.
Oh,
And I just thought that was so interesting, because we were trying to play with the big agencies and just kind of present ourselves as this sort of like proper, legit creative agency. And that wasn't what, it doesn't mean that we would have won, but that wasn't why we were in the mix. We were in the mix for our YouTube, our scrappier, content-led sort of ways of doing things. And that's what they wanted to see from us. So yes, always ask for feedback. I also think if you've won the business, and hopefully you've
why
won the
did you
business,
pick us? Yeah.
why did you pick us? There's so much good information on that, because I think we can get caught up in the win and just, we get, excuse me, we can get very, we get caught up in the win and the, self-congratulation, but it's just like, ask the client, why did you pick us? Because I think there's probably definitely good information there.
That is interesting that you didn't get that win because of the things
You're-
that you were very good at that you didn't didn't come to the client with. But in that case, I mean, almost is the client at fault for not sort of just being upfront with the agency? I mean, wouldn't it help if there's a bit more sort of honesty from clients in terms of why they're putting certain agencies on their pitch list?
I don't think so, actually. I think it's, I probably, to be fair to the clients, they've got a lot going on in the world. This one campaign isn't the center of their universe. Maybe there's things that they've missed off.
Yeah.
It's definitely not their fault, but it's the fault of the agency to go at the very beginning. So I would always ask in that first conversation
to not question the brief,
but just to say, why are we speaking? Why have you put us in the mix? What have you been to our website? What work did you like? Really trying to understand why they've chosen you. And maybe you also learned that they've chosen you because they just Googled 5 agencies and you were top of the list and they thought, we'll give you a call. That's also interesting information, because it really shows that they don't see you as the expert yet. So it's up to the agency at the beginning of the engagement, the sales engagement, to ask the questions. I don't think we can blame the client for that.
I've got one more. Can I ask one more question, Seth? I've got one more question.
Yeah, go for it.
And I'm taking us back a few conversations now, in terms of process. So, one of the reasons we love you is you have a process, and you've been in the market way longer than us. We're new to the market, and we have a process to enable agencies to deliver strategy to their client. How do you feel agencies feel about process and structure? We're getting lots of different feedback about this. And then as another process structure driven business, I'd like to get, who's been around longer than us, I'd like to get some feedback.
I think more than ever, it's vital. I think obviously you need strong positioning to get you in the doorway. But I think without a process, things quickly fall apart. And then you go back to that feeling of we're winging it again. And I think there's such reassurance from the client's point of view that you have a process. You have not just a process, that's a repeatable process that's proven to work time and time again. And I think that's the key to it. And I think without that, it's everything just feels a little bit made up on the spot. Everything feels like you're reinventing.
Feel like you're throwing a bit at the wall and none of it's sticking.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to the doctor analogy, not to overuse it.
We
imagine
love it.
But imagine the doctor said, okay, we're now at the stage where we are having the open heart surgery. And you obviously, as a patient, you're incredibly nervous. They're about to open you up. And I appreciate advertising campaigns are not life and death like open heart surgery. But if you would say to the doctor, can you just talk me through how this is going to work because you're so nervous? Option one is the doctor or the surgeon will say to you, look, we're going to put you we'll put you to sleep, then we're going to get you into the theatre, we'll open you up and we'll see what's going on in there, and we'll work it out whilst we're in there, and we'll patch you up. Or the doctor says to you, don't worry, this is incredibly routine. We're going to open you up. Our process is we do X, Y, and Z. Then this happens. If this happens, then we do this. And then we put you back together and you're as good as new. Which of those feels better? And I think in our own creative world, we need to do the same thing. We need to be able to say to the client, we have a process. This is how it works. But I think it doesn't matter that your process may be similar to another agency's process. Look, let's be honest. It's just like there's only so many ways that the creative process works. It's usually like you diagnose, then you come up with the insight, then you come up with the idea, then you make the thing, and then maybe at the end of it, there's some kind of recalibration, making sure that it works. So your process doesn't have to be ridiculously unique. It just needs to be a process that you can show works again and again. And I think that's also a mistake that agencies make, where you go to their website, they've got this beautifully complex Venn diagram of their proprietary process. And sometimes they're okay, sometimes they're kind of ridiculous. But what you never see afterwards is a case study that shows that process being brought to life. So a really great phrase that I learned is, does the agency have process framed case studies? And I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. So if you have a process, and hopefully you do, for God's sake, bring it to life through your case study. So if your process is A, B, C, D, in your case study, I want to see A, B, C, D, and I want to see what A did, and I want to see what B did, and I want to see what C did, and I want to see what D did. And if you didn't use C, that's fine. Just show me A, B, and D working in this instance. But that's what gives clients confidence, that you know what you're doing. Yeah. And it's just, but maybe sometimes, I don't know, maybe some businesses that feels boring to have to do the same thing again and again and again. Yeah. It doesn't feel so creative because it's so process driven.
But if you don't have a process, mm-hmm. I mean, what are your sort of tips, that you could implement tomorrow as an agency to have better conversations with your clients? I mean, I love that Dan Sullivan question, and I think that's probably a question that I would use again and again and again.
Well, I guess my first tip would be to try and develop a process, and in that sense, maybe a slightly flippant answer, but just document the way that you do things, and at the very least, then case studies are such a great way to bring to life the efficacy of your work. And so make sure that your case studies bring to life the problem. And this sounds so obvious, but the problem that the client had, your solution, and the results. I think that's another big area that's often missing. You often talk about what are the conversations that we're not having, or the things that are falling through the gaps. I think metrics are often falling through the gaps. And I think, yes. I don't think there's probably enough conversation around metrics and what does success look like. So if we were to deliver that 3-year picture, how would we know that we've been successful? What metrics would we be looking at? And I think there's a bit of a fear, maybe, to use that word again, where agencies put so much focus on the creative part of the work. And often it's really hard to measure how successful it is, or how do we know that it's working? And so that bit of the conversation is often bypassed. And there's a sort of that fear of like agencies holding themselves accountable. We should hold ourselves accountable to numbers, shouldn't we? But I think that often it can be quite woolly in the metrics area, and that's a problem.
I just going back to your process, I believe, and this is what I'd like MSQ to be, that almost the process is invisible. It's a scaffold of which your creativity and your people sit on. So it shouldn't be, here's a it's like you saying, you can jump around the conversations. It's like, for me, it's like, let's get our process book out. That a process should be invisible. It's a scaffold. Your point of difference is your creativity and your people, and the process, yours and ours, is really there to make them shine, not to outshine the people. Or am I, am I just underplaying process?
I don't, potentially. I mean, I certainly think when, when I'm speaking to creative companies about going through some sales training, it gives me such confidence to be able to say, this is what it looks like. I teach you the 4 conversations model. The 4 conversations model is this. It takes 2 days. It's a 2-day workshop that looks like this, this, and this. I feel like an expert when I have that. when I can bring the model to life. So
Yeah.
I don't. But
I'm
I do appreciate.
I'm not saying it shouldn't be visible. I'm not saying it shouldn't be there. I'm just saying agencies get this, oh, we're creative, we're not process and structured. So it needs to be there, but it doesn't. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. The process shouldn't be the first thing that the process is not the first thing that you bring to life. When you're talking to a client, the first thing that you should be is like, what are we expert in? What problems are we expert in solving? So that's really around your specialization. Once you have your specialization, the next tier down is, okay, we also have a process to solve those problems. So I definitely don't think that you lead with process. Just to pick up on something else you said, I think you mentioned something around leaning on the people and our creativity. I'm not sure about that. So I think agencies typically will talk about how they have the best people, and I'm not sure that that's necessary. Every agency has good people. If you're not an agency full of good people, what are you? So
Well,
and if you're not,
that's another conversation.
yeah, and if you're not creative, then what are you? And if you're not strategic, so I think often agencies lean on these words, which will be like they will lean in and say we're the most strategic or we're the most creative agency. And for me, that's just like cost of entry, that you should be strategic or creative, or that you're going to have good people. So for me, the things to focus on are positioning and expertise, and then if you have a process, bringing that to life.
Brilliant. Well, Aaron, it's been a thoroughly interesting conversation with you.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise.
I think we've all learned a lot. As I say, I love that Dan Sullivan question. I think that's genius. Now, if anyone wants to sort of find out more or reach out to you, I mean, how should they do that? How would you like them to do that?
I mean, the best way is come to my website. It's thehutch.co, or I also have I have a form where you can register interest if you're interested in some kind of training. So I'll share that with you. And
brilliant. Well, look,
Thanks,
thank you
Aaron.
so much for being a great guest on The Space Between. And to everyone that is listening, there's no reason to stay stuck in the gap when you can reach out to Aaron and he'll help you navigate that space between. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Aaron.
Great talk. See you
Cheers, Aaron.
Thank you for listening to The Space Between, where honest conversations just came to life. Brought to you by MSQ. Visit msqindex.com to learn more. Now, go forth and enter your own space between.